Flosstube, my name is Amy and I am the Globetrotting Stitcher. This is my very first Flosstube video, and so like everyone is when they make their first Flosstube, I'm pretty nervous, but we will see how this goes. Since it is my first Flosstube, I thought I would start out by telling you a little bit about myself, my stitching history, my stitching style. But first, I thought it would probably be a good idea to tell you why I am the Globetrotting Stitcher. When I was thinking about starting a Flosstube channel and what might make me a little bit different than some other Flosstubers, I thought about the fact that I tend to travel pretty regularly for work internationally, and I get to go to some pretty interesting places. So in the last couple of years, I've been to Mongolia. I've spent a lot of time in East Africa. Obviously, with the current situation happening in the world, I'm not going anywhere right now and haven't gone anywhere for several months. But at some point, whenever things get back to whatever the new normal looks like, and I start traveling again, I'd love to share some of those adventures with you and let you see what some of those places look like. So hopefully, eventually I'll be able to bring a little bit more of the globetrotting into the stitching, but for right now, it's just going to be the stitching. We'll see. So a little bit about my stitching history. I have been stitching for a little over 30 years. I started stitching when I was probably 8 or 9 years old. And I don't remember exactly who taught me to cross stitch. I can't recall whether it was something that I learned on my own or, but I do remember there was a group of older ladies that were at the church that I went to, and they had a little like crafting and sewing and stitching meetup that they had on, I don't even remember how frequently, but I remember as a 8 or 9 year old girl kind of crashing their meetups and sitting there, and they were so sweet to tolerate me, and I remember them showing me things. And so and there was another lady who was in my church that she would my mom would take me to her house, and she taught me to hand sew little pillows and things like that. So that was kind of where I began my stitching career, was with those lovely ladies. And I've been stitching fairly consistently ever since then. I've had a couple of lengthier gaps, but for the most part, I've been stitching for a number of years now. So I thought, as a part of kind of telling you about myself and my stitching style, I would maybe try you doing a few of the questions from one of those Know Your Needle Worker tags, and I don't recall which Flosstuber originated this particular one, so I apologize that I don't know who to give credit to, but thank you to that person anyway. So the first question that I'll ask and answer is, what is your favorite fabric? So my favorite fabric, I have been stitching on linen for probably 25 years at least. Obviously, like most stitchers, I started out working on Aida. And back when I started working on Aida, and those of you that have been stitching for a long time, you will recall how stiff and awful Aida was to work with back in those days. And so when I remember going to one of the LNSs, we used to have a number in my area, and unfortunately we only have one now. But I remember going to the LNS, and one of the ladies that worked there introduced me to linen, and I absolutely loved it, and I never turned back. And I was a strictly linen stitcher for many years, up until I discovered Flosstube, which opened up a whole world for me, and that was about 1.5 years ago. And I learned about even weaves from various Flosstubers, and so I have been playing around with Lugana and Jobelin for the last 1.5 years and really enjoy stitching on those. Having said that, I have a couple of stitchy friends who are what we like to call Aida gangstas, and they have been singing the praises of Aida and how it's improved so much over the years and how it's so much softer, and all the beautiful overdyed options that are available now. And so I've been toying with the idea of maybe trying Aida again, because it's a great fabric to have in your arsenal. So the next question is, do you stitch in a hoop or a frame? Now I stitch with either a Q-snap or a scroll rod. When I first started stitching, I always stitched with a hoop, and that worked beautifully when I was working on Aida, but when I switched to linen, I found that my hoops would like stretch the linen, and it would stretch it out of shape, and you'd get like these sort of like wave patterns where the threads of the linen were out of, they were wonky. And I really didn't like that, and I found myself like using my needle to try and get everything nice and properly woven up again. And so at that point, I stopped working on a hoop and I went to stitching in hand. And I stitched in hand for many, many years, up until a few years ago when the owner of the one LNS that we still have in my area had suggested that I try a Q-snap. And I had never heard of a Q-snap, and I love my Q-snaps now. So I use a Q-snap for all of my small and medium-sized pieces. And then for my really large pieces, I work with an Omronic scroll frame, which you'll see when I start showing my whips. Do you use a stand or do you hold your stitching? So the only time I hold my stitching is if I'm actually stitching while I'm out and about or visiting a friend. And when I'm at home working on my normal pieces, I always use a stand because I like to stitch two-handed. So and then I recently acquired a Lowry, one of the new Lowry table clamps, which I'm really looking forward to using when my stitchy group can meet up again. Because then I can continue to do my two-handed stitching even when I'm not at home. But my first floor stand was a Needlework System 4, and there were a lot of really great things about that stand. It worked really well for me for a while, but there were a few limitations that I didn't like. And so about a year and a half ago, I switched to a Lowry, and I absolutely love my Lowry. And I would probably do harm to anybody who tried to take it away from me. What is your favorite time to stitch? Anytime? Anytime. When do I normally stitch? I usually stitch after dinner at the end of the day during the week. And then I stitch as much as I can on the weekend, with the caveat that sometimes I have to stop stitching so that my husband will not leave me. Yeah. Do you use a paper chart or digital? I use both. So I am a devoted convert to Pattern Keeper. Really, really love using Pattern Keeper, and I really enjoy using digital charts. If I could do everything that I stitch in a digital chart, I absolutely would. But if something's only available as a paper chart and I love the design, then I will work with a paper chart. So it's just whatever needs to be, whatever the option is, but I like both. Are you a floss licker? Aren't you? Yes, I'm a floss licker. Guilty as charged. I am not at all ashamed. Do you hoard or buy supplies as needed? I am definitely more in the buy supplies as needed camp. So I do have a system for planning my projects, but and I have a small hoard of charts, like a little over 100 charts, which that's not a lot compared to many floss tubers. But you know, some people might say over 100 is too many. So I hoard charts a little bit. I don't have a big stash as far as fabrics and flosses, and that's because I tend to only buy a fabric or a floss if I specifically need it for a project. And in fact, I do have, maybe 2 or 3 pieces of fabric that aren't specifically designated for a project. And just knowing that those are there and they don't have a purpose makes me feel anxious. I stress out about it because I think, gosh, what if I have that beautiful piece of fabric and I never use it and I spent money on something I'll never use? Same thing with flosses. I'm not like in a fabric or floss of the month club simply because like the thought of spending that much money on something and having it never get used just bothers me. So I do kit up projects in advance. So I have a couple of projects that are fully kitted and just waiting for me to get to them, but I don't have a stash that I can kind of pull from at will. Do you have more FFOs or UFOs? I have definitely more FFOs. So for those of you who are new to Flosstube, FFOs are fully finished objects. UFOs are unfinished objects, with the caveat that they're not just unfinished, they're like unfinished and you're probably never going to go back to them. They're sort of in the I will never finish this bin. I'm one of those people who, when I start something, I almost always will finish it eventually. So whether that's a cross-stitch chart or a book, I have read so many terrible books that I'll get a third of the way through it and I'm like, I hate this book. It is the worst book that was ever written. How did this person ever get published? And I will still finish the book because I have to. I can't have that unfinished thing in my life. And so I'm the same way with my cross stitch charts, where if I start it, I almost always finish it. So I have maybe 1 or 2 UFOs across the entirety of my stitching career. I don't have a whole lot of things lurking in closets waiting to be done. Do you mostly stitch alone, or do you get together to stitch with friends? Most of the time I stitch alone, just because, you know, yeah. But I am part of a wonderful local stitchy group, the Kitsap Cross Stitchers, which is the home to several illustrious floss tubers like Sambry Stitches, Becca, and Cece, who is Geeky Girls Knit and Cross Stitch. She and my daughter have also a floss tube combo with a knitting podcast. And it is a lovely, lovely group of ladies, and we've been expanding the group, and we've been meeting via Zoom since everybody's been sort of in this kind of quarantine mode. So that's sort of my local stitchy group, and I love getting together with them. But usually I stitch alone. Do you start in the middle or at the corner? So I have always been a middle starter. I was a middle starter up until about 1.5 years ago, when I fell down the floss tube rabbit hole. And it blew my mind when floss tubers were talking about starting in the corner, because it had never occurred to me that you could start in the corner. I always thought, oh gosh, like what if you don't have enough fabric, or how do you know how to start? And now I don't start anything in the middle. I start everything in the corner. And I absolutely love it. And for me, I actually, the way that I approach my stitching, it makes more sense to me to start up in the corner. So mentally I work left to right, top to bottom. And so I always struggled with starting in the middle. Like I could work from the middle all the way down, but I hated having to count back up to the top and then stitch down. That just felt really stressful for me. And so having found a way to start at the top and just work my way down has been fantastic. Do you use a timekeeper to track how long it takes you to complete a project? So I don't use a timekeeper as far as tracking the number of hours I put into a project. I do, however, have a spreadsheet that I use for tracking progress on my whips. It was a spreadsheet that was created by Brian Blitzstitch, who is one of the first floss tubers I discovered, and I really enjoy watching his channel. And he's got this fantastic spreadsheet where you can keep track of all your whips and your finishes, and it calculates all of this for you. And so I don't use the spreadsheet exactly as intended, but what I do is I use it to track the number of days that I work on a specific project, so that when I finish it, I know how many days it took me to finish it. And I find it really interesting to see how many actual days go into getting a project finished. I just kind of find that interesting. What is your favorite floss? So my favorite floss, I am a little old-fashioned this way. I think I probably am going to default to say DMC. I do enjoy stitching with over-dyed flosses, particularly if they're color fast. And I think the reason I enjoy DMC so much is because it is color fast. So I love the over-dyed fabrics and the hand-dyed flosses and all of those things. But if they're not color fast, I don't like using them as much, because I don't like not being able to wash my project when it's finished. I have 2 furry shedder dogs that leave their specialty fibers all over the place. They will live forever in my cross stitch pieces because their fur is deeply embedded in every stitch. I also am really bad about snacking and drinking, more drinking than snacking, but let's be honest, it happens. So yeah, I snack and drink while I stitch. I know that's like a major broken rule, but I do it. And so I may or may not have accidentally spilled coffee on like the side of a piece once or twice. It's fine. It's totally fine. But yeah, so if I can't wash a piece when I'm finished working on it, I need to be able to wash it, especially if it's a big piece that's going to take me a while. So yeah, I'm definitely the kind of person that's going to default to something that's more color fast as a preference. I have stitched with silks a couple of times. I do enjoy that, but I actually like stitching with DMC a little bit more. Let's see. Are you a serial starter or a monogamous stitcher? I am neither. I am not a serial starter. For many years I was a monogamous stitcher, and Flosstube was actually the thing that introduced me to the whole idea that you didn't have to be a monogamous stitcher, that you could have more than one whip. And it was, again, Blitz Stitch, whose Flosstube videos kind of first introduced me to that concept. And it was like my whole world opened up when I came into the idea of having a rotation. So the way that I think about stitchers is you've got your monogamous stitchers who they only stitch one piece at a time, which is great for them. And then there are some of you out there that I like to call promiscuous stitchers. No shame. I would say a promiscuous stitcher is a stitcher who has more than 8 whips. I don't fall into either of those categories. Having that many whips is too stressful for me, because I'm not a process stitcher, I'm a progress stitcher. And so if I am not seeing progress on a piece, if I'm not getting to a point where I'm feeling like I'm going to be able to finish that piece and actually display it and enjoy it, it's really demotivating for me. So I am what I like to call a polygamous stitcher. And a polygamous stitcher is a stitcher who has 2 to 7 whips. Which is, able to make a commitment, but not totally loyal to one piece. And that's only in stitching. I only have one husband. So yeah, that's me. I'm a polygamous stitcher. Do you have a whip rotation? Yes, I have a whip rotation. So my whip rotation, you guys are gonna discover my own personal brand of overly structuredness when I show you my rotation. So I have a rotation, a 4-week rotation. So I spend 1 week on each project, and there are 4 projects. And then I have 1 travel piece. So I have a total of 5 whips at any given time. But each spot in my rotation, the way that I like to do it so that I can kind of get to a little bit of everything that I love is that each spot in my rotation has a designated purpose. So it's not just you finish a piece and then you slide in whatever new piece is speaking to you the loudest. For me, that while that would work, I like to think that, okay, I can dabble, and it helps me to plan if I have a purpose for each spot in the rotation. So the first spot in my rotation, for instance, is my full coverage spot. And when at whatever point 5 years from now I finish a full coverage piece, then the next piece that I would start in that spot of the rotation would be a new full coverage piece. The second spot in my rotation is my Fancy Lady spot. And typically for my Fancy Ladies, I tend to flip back and forth between Mirabilias and lavender and lace designs. More Mirabilias these days than lavender and lace, but I'll go back and forth between the two. So I will always have one Fancy Lady on the go. The next spot is my sampler spot. And that can be for, some of the more traditional samplers, or it could be for a Quaker Sampler or what have you. So that's my sampler spot. And then the final spot in my rotation is my seasonal or gift stitching. So yeah, I think this is a good time for me to start showing you all of my whips, because that's what you guys are really here for. So my first whip is, I'm going to show you my oldest whip first. And this is a piece that I started working on in March of 2019. This piece is called Rose Trellis In. It is a Haid chart of a Randall Spangler design. The art is by Randall Spangler and it's been charted by Haid. So it's Rose Trellis In, and I'm going to put up a picture now of what this design will look like when it is finished, hopefully before I'm 50, but we shall see. So this is a piece that I am stitching on 28 count Lugana. I am stitching it 1/1 using the Continental half stitch, and hopefully you can see that. Oh, here we go. Got a little assistance from the hubs. There we go. Thank you. Oh, what a mess. Okay. So as I said, 28 count Lugana, stitching this 1/1 Continental Continental tent stitch. And as you can see, I am using the parking method. And I'm stitching in diagonals. I picked that up from a couple of other floss tubers. And so on my really large designs, I don't stitch in diagonals on everything I do, but I definitely stitch in diagonals on all of my full coverage. I tend to stitch in diagonals on my mirabilias. And this piece is, you can't see it here because it's moving out of a heavy confetti zone, but like up in this area and in through here, this is super, super heavy in confetti. One of the things that I have been finding, and I've seen a lot of other full coverage stitchers talk about this when they use the tent stitch, is the stitching is starting, I feel, to kind of pull out of alignment a little bit. So you can kind of see along this edge here where it's happening. So if anybody has any tips on how to prevent that, or how to maybe block the fabric to stretch it back into shape, that would be great, because I'm really worried that over the years of working on this, that's just going to get worse and that I'm going to have a really wonky design when I'm done. So would love any input that you might have on this. So this one will be, this one is going to be with me forever, I feel like. It's a slow piece to work on, but it's really beautiful. And I'm looking forward, so you can see on this side, I'm finally over to the far right side of the piece. And so one of the things I'm looking forward to over the next couple of rotations is beginning to actually work down here in the house. Okay. And if you heard that wonderful barking, that's Bear Pants saying hello. The next design that I am working on is my Fancy Lady, and I am currently working on Celtic Autumn by Lavender and Lace. And I'm going to show you right here what that looks like. But I'm probably also going to put up a picture so you can see it more clearly on the screen, just to post one in. But I didn't stitch this one for a really long time. I had seen it and I loved the Celtic Lady designs by Lavender and Lace, but some of the colors that were chosen for some of them, this one in particular, I'm not one to generally modify my pieces all that much. I usually will stitch with the called for flosses at the very least. I'm much freer with like the fabric choices, but I usually stick with the called for colors because when I pick a design, it's the combination of the design and the colors that are what appeal to me. And this one for autumn, it's like this indigo blue and gold that that the original design is charted in. And to me, that's just not autumn. And so I was like, well, I'll just never stitch it, and that's fine. And then I saw I'm part of a Facebook group for Celtic Ladies Lavender and Lace conversions. And I saw this conversion on there that was charted some years ago now by Janet Granger, and it's on her blog. I will include a link to that in my show notes so that if you're interested, you can go get her conversion. But it recharted this using the more traditional colors that we associate with autumn. So the greens and oranges and yellows, and it's really, really lovely. So I'll show you where I am now. I started this design in January, and I am stitching this on 32 count earthen Belfast linen by Picture This Plus. And I absolutely love it. So you can see I've stitched her skin in 1/1. And then this section here is something I just stitched in the last time I worked on this piece. If you see the photo of the original design, it stops at her hand, and then there's like a fall of beads that are kind of spraying away. In that same conversion group that I was talking about, there's a stitcher, I think her name is Emma Chisholm, and she has charted these beautiful leaves in this twig. And these are all stitched 1/1, and they are absolutely, I don't know if you can see that. If not, we'll put up a close-up so you can kind of see the detailed 1/1 stitching in these leaves. But they're really pretty, and I think they add quite a bit to the design. So I have a good ways to go on this, but it is just lovely. It's really pretty and so much fun to stitch. And I'm looking forward to stitching others in this series. Many years ago, I stitched the Celtic Christmas, the Noel, for a friend of mine. But this is the second one I've done. Okay, my next whip. This whip is, I started when did I start this? I started this last fall, I think in October of 2019. So this is my my seasonal gift spot in my rotation. And this is a design that I am stitching for my niece. So she is a big fan of Frozen, and Cameron is, she is 9 years old. She's gonna be 9. She is like the light of my life. I absolutely adore her. And she is very fascinated by Auntie's cross stitch. And so every time she sees me, she wants to know how my cross stitch is doing. And she's trying to learn how to cross stitch herself, and she's so much fun. And so I saw this design. Stitchin' Mommy did this for her daughter several years ago. And I saw it on her Flosstube channel, and as soon as I saw it, I thought of my Cameron. I said, I need to do that one for my Cameron. So this is Winter Queen by Shannon Christine Designs. And so I'm going to put up a picture of what it will look like when it's finished right here. And I am stitching this design on, it's supposed to be a 32 count Blue Fusion Jobelin by Silk Weaver. And I think this is a fabric that shrunk a bit in the dyeing process because it feels a lot smaller than a normal 32 count. And I'm actually fine with that. I am finding that most of the time I stitch on 32 count, and I'm starting to dabble in the higher fabric counts. I do not like stitching on 28 count unless it's 1/1. And so I'm going to show you where I am. So this is my lovely Winter Queen. I am so close to a finish. I had high hopes of finishing her. She's what I'm currently on in my rotation. And I had really high hopes of finishing her in this round, and it's just not going to happen. So I've been working really heavily here in this icy tree, which I foolishly thought, oh, I'll just blow through that. That'll be quick. No, it is not quick. And that's okay. But while she's not something that I would ever stitch and display with my own decor, she is really, really beautiful, and she's so sparkly and so beautifully beaded. And so I think she's just going to be the perfect birthday surprise for my favorite girl. Okay, so the last piece that is a part of my regular 4-week rotation that I'm going to show you today is my my sampler piece. And this is a really beautiful design. This is what it'll look like when it's finished. And this is a beautiful Quaker Sampler by Stickedane van der Wierenberg. And this is the Rose Quaker Sampler. I saw somebody finish this on Instagram fairly recently, and it was absolutely beautiful. And then I know Stitcher Mel, who has a Flosstube channel. She's also stitching this. She started this earlier this year. It's absolutely beautiful design. So I started mine back in August of 2019, and I am stitching this on 32 count soft apricot linen by Color and Cotton, which I really hope the camera picks up just how beautiful this fabric is. It's a light to moderately mottled fabric. It's got some pinky and corally tones to it, which are just beautiful and just offset the threads. I'm stitching this in all the called for threads. And let's see here. Let me try and get something behind this so that you can see it. There we go. All right, so let's just pull that down a little bit so it's straight. There we go. So hopefully you can see just how beautiful this piece is. I will show you, there are a couple of spots that I've discovered on this piece as I've been stitching it where there's some minor inconsistencies in the chart. So just some things for those of you that might be stitching this now or who might want to stitch it in the future. There's like a missing stitch here on the chart, and then I think it's in this motif and this motif. There's not a perfect mirror. So just a couple things to be aware of. Like if you stitch this section, it doesn't exactly mirror this section in the chart. I think that was just a charting mistake. Same thing here. There's a stitch that's in here that wasn't down here. And so just something to pay attention to for consistency's sake. But this is just absolutely lovely. These motifs take a lot longer to stitch than I thought they would. I thought I would be done with this by now. And it's been a much slower stitch than expected, but it's such a beautiful design to stitch on. This is a lovely fabric to stitch on. So yeah, So that's my Rose Quaker Sampler. All right, I'm gonna put this away, and then I will show you my final whip, which is my my travel piece. Let me just roll this up really quickly. So while I'm putting this away, I keep my, so this is the only design that I have on scroll rods right now. And I keep it on the scroll rod at all times, but I just roll it up when I'm not actively stitching on it. I don't keep it stretched taut. And I don't generally keep my my pieces in Q-snaps unless I'm actively stitching on them, with the exception of my travel stitching, because it's sort of basic and whatnot. So this piece I started, I think, 3 weeks ago. And I am slowly but surely working my way through the Country Cottage Needleworks Cottages of the Month. And this is the 7th one I've done. So I am currently working on the August cottage, using all the called for flosses. And I am stitching the entire series, and I'm sorry, I'm leaving it in the Q-snap. It's gonna look pretty hokey, but it is what it is. So I am stitching the entire series on 28 count mushroom Lugana, and let me tell you something. This is where I am right now. When I am finished with this series, I will never stitch 2/2 on 28 count again, as God is my witness. I do not like it. I am a coverage nut, and so that's part of the reason why I like 32 count and higher counts of fabric, because I can get much better coverage. And this particular design, or this particular fabric, while it's beautiful, I have to constantly fluff and correct and fuss with the thread after I've stitched it to get the coverage and make the threads lay nicely. So somebody else who is stitching this right now is Debbie Bernheisel on Snug Harbor Crafts. So she and I started, I think, roughly around the same time, and I've been enjoying watching her progress. So yeah, hoping to finish this one in the next couple of weeks. And then I will show you, I'll do a fully finished on this when it's all done, and I'll show you how that turned out. So that's all of my whips. I'm gonna wrap up by just telling you a little bit about what I'm gonna be working on over the next couple of weeks. So I am hoping, my husband and I are working on this as a project together. My husband is a professional digital media specialist, and so he does all the videography and all the editing and all the photos and all of those sorts of things. And so he's helping me as he has time between his own business commitments, which is such a sweet and amazing thing for him to do. And so depending on what his schedule looks like and what my schedule looks like, we're going to try and do a new video every 2 weeks. So between now and then, I'm going to continue working on my travel stitching, so we'll see how much progress I can make there. And then I am just at the end of my rotation on Winter Queen, so I'm going to be working on her for the rest of today. And then over the next week, I will be working on Rose Trellis In. And then the week after that, we'll be working on my Rose Quaker Sampler. So those are the projects that hopefully you'll be able to see some progress on the next time we film. I'm going to go ahead and wrap it up, but just wanted to say that hopefully you enjoyed this video. Hopefully you like the things I'm working on. And if you did, I hope that you will comment, like, subscribe, share, and feel free to also follow me on Instagram. I post my progress there, sometimes daily, more likely weekly now. My Instagram account is @globetrotting_Stitcher. So yeah, thanks for hanging out with me today, and I will hope to see you again really soon. Keep stitching. Bye.